Put the cub down and step away. The command crossed the snowy clearing with such quiet authority that every wolf around Grace Miller went still. She remained on her knees beneath the towering pines, her gray winter cloak spread across the snow, a small white wolf cub trembling against her chest. 20 feet away stood Ethan Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, surrounded by royal guards in dark winter cloaks. A ceremonial silver spear rested in his right hand, angled toward the ground, but Grace barely noticed it. Her attention remained on the cub. His golden eyes were half closed, his breathing soft against her wrist. "He needs help," she said. Ethan's expression revealed nothing. "That is why you need to give him to me." Grace looked toward the old steel trap lying several feet away. Someone had scratched away the symbol once carved into its side, leaving only faint marks beneath the frost. She did not know why that mattered yet. She only knew the cub had been alone when she found him, frightened and cold, and now an entire royal search party was looking at her as though she might be responsible. "Bring your healer here," Grace said. A royal guard glanced sharply at Ethan. Nobody spoke to the Alpha King that way, especially not an Omega wearing a faded cloak and muddy boots. Ethan took one measured step forward. The cub immediately pressed closer to Grace. She felt his fear before she heard the faint sound in his throat. "Stop," she whispered. Ethan stopped. Something changed in his eyes. Not anger. Surprise. Grace lowered her face toward the cub. "You are safe," she murmured. His body shivered beneath her hand. She remembered another winter night years ago, when her mother had held her through a fever and kissed her forehead as though tenderness alone could convince the darkness to pass. Grace did the same now. She pressed one gentle kiss to the cub's forehead. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then his golden eyes opened. Fully. A strange warmth moved beneath Grace's palm and traveled through her chest. Deep inside her, where her wolf had remained almost silent for years, something stirred. Grace drew a startled breath. The cub lifted his head. Ethan's grip loosened around the spear. "Noah," he whispered. Grace looked up. The Alpha King knew him. Noah heard his name, but instead of leaving Grace, he tucked himself closer beneath her arm. Ethan stared at the cub, then at Grace, and for the first time the certainty in his face disappeared. Grace did not know that Noah carried Blackwood blood. She did not know that royal guards had been searching for him since sunset. And she certainly did not know why the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories was looking at her as though something impossible had just happened. She only knew Noah trusted her. That was enough. Ethan slowly lowered the spear until its silver tip rested harmlessly against the snow. 3 hours earlier, Grace had stood beneath the glowing lanterns of Cedar Ridge Hall, believing rejection would be the worst thing that happened to her that night. She had been wrong. 3 hours earlier, Grace Miller stood beneath the glowing lanterns of Cedar Ridge Hall and discovered that humiliation had a sound. It was not shouting. It was the sudden silence of more than 100 people trying not to whisper while Logan Pierce faced her beneath the silver moon crest of their pack. Grace could hear the fire crackling in the stone hearth behind him. She could hear snow tapping softly against the tall windows. Most of all, she could hear her own heartbeat as Logan took a slow breath and refused to meet her eyes. "Grace, I cannot accept this bond." The words were gentle. That made them worse. Around them, families who had gathered for the moonbond ceremony shifted uncomfortably. Grace kept her hands folded beneath her gray cloak so nobody would see her fingers trembling. She had known Logan since childhood. He had walked beside her through summer festivals, carried baskets for her aunt at harvest, and once told Grace that rank meant nothing to him. But Logan had recently been chosen for a leadership position within Cedar Ridge, and suddenly an Omega whose wolf had barely awakened was no longer the future he wanted. "Is this because I am an Omega?" Grace asked. Logan finally looked at her. "It is because I need someone who can stand beside me." The sentence landed quietly. Grace understood what he meant. Someone stronger. Someone respected. Someone Cedar Ridge would admire instead of tolerate. Several feet behind Logan stood Madison Cole, a confident beta from one of the pack's oldest families. Grace did not need anyone to explain the rest. Pain tightened her chest, but she refused to let it bend her posture. "Then say it clearly," she said. Logan hesitated. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps he had expected her to ask what she could change. Grace would give him neither. "I reject our bond." A murmur moved through the hall. Grace lifted her chin. "I accept." 2 words. Nothing more. She turned before anyone could see how much they cost her. Nobody stopped her as she crossed the polished floor. Outside, cold air touched her face, clean and sharp. Snow-covered cedar ridge in quiet white, softening rooftops, fences, and the road leading toward the forest. Grace pulled her cloak tighter and started toward the cottage she shared with her aunt nearly 2 miles away. The main road would have taken her past several pack homes, so she chose the narrow forest trail instead. She wanted darkness. She wanted silence. She wanted 5 minutes in which nobody knew what had happened. Once the lights of Cedar Ridge disappeared behind the trees, Grace finally stopped. One tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away with the heel of her hand. "You still have yourself," she whispered, repeating the words her mother had taught her years ago. The ache remained, but her breathing steadied. Grace started walking again. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Wind moved gently through the pine branches overhead. Then she heard something. Grace stopped. The forest became silent. She waited, wondering whether grief had turned an ordinary sound into something important. Then it came again from somewhere beyond the trail. A faint whimper. Grace turned toward the darkness between the trees. Whatever was out there sounded small and frightened. She left the path. Grace followed the sound nearly 60 yards beyond the trail, moving carefully between snow-covered pines until the ground dipped into a narrow clearing. The whimper came. Again. This time she saw him. A small white wolf cub lay beside a fallen branch, his golden eyes fixed on her with exhausted fear. One leg was caught in an old steel trap, half buried beneath the snow. Grace stopped several feet away. "Easy," she whispered. "I am not going to hurt you." The cub tried to pull away, but exhaustion quickly won. Grace lowered herself slowly, keeping her hands visible. She knew frightened animals could panic when approached too quickly, and the last thing she wanted was to make his situation worse. "I know you do not trust me," she murmured. "That makes two of us having a difficult night." His ears shifted at her voice. Grace extended one open hand. For several seconds, he only watched her. Then his nose lifted. He caught her scent, and something unexpected happened. The fear in his golden eyes softened. He reached his head toward her fingers. Grace gently touched the fur between his ears. "There you are." She examined the trap without disturbing his leg. Cedar Ridge hunters marked every legal device with the pack crest, but this one carried no recognizable symbol. At first, Grace assumed age had worn it away. Then moonlight caught a series of fresh scratches along the metal. She brushed away the snow and leaned closer. Someone had deliberately scraped away a crest. A tiny curved line remained beneath the scratches, too incomplete to identify. "What happened to you?" Grace whispered. Voices suddenly carried through the trees. "Grace." She recognized Daniel Foster, one of Cedar Ridge's patrol wolves. Moments later, Daniel entered the clearing with 2 others, Caleb Turner and Owen Brooks. Their relief at finding her disappeared when they noticed the cub. "Step away from it," Caleb said. Grace looked up. "He is trapped." Daniel approached cautiously. "That cub is not Cedar Ridge." "I know." "Then we report his location and let the Border Patrol handle it." Grace stared at him. "He is freezing." Owen glanced toward the surrounding forest. "We do not know where he came from. This could involve rogues or another pack." "He is a cub," Grace said. Caleb shook his head. "You have had a difficult night. Do not turn this into something bigger." "Because you are upset." The words struck harder than Grace expected. An hour earlier, Logan had decided she was too weak to stand beside him. Now Caleb was deciding that pain made her incapable of judgment. Grace looked down at the cub. He was smaller than everyone surrounding him. Powerless, depending on strangers to decide whether he deserved help. Something inside her settled. "No," Daniel blinked. "What did you say?" Grace rose slowly and positioned herself between the patrol and the cub. Her knees trembled, but her voice did not. "I said no. We are not leaving him here." Caleb exhaled impatiently. "Grace, rank exists for a reason. Then use yours to help someone." Silence followed. Even Grace seemed surprised by her own words. The cub pressed his nose against the back of her hand. Daniel looked from Grace to the scratched metal, then crouched to examine it. His expression changed. "Caleb." He brushed frost from the damaged surface. Beneath the erased crest, another faint detail had appeared. The edge of a crown. Daniel stared at the faint crown beneath the scratches, and the impatience disappeared from his face. "That is not a Cedar Ridge mark." Caleb crouched beside him, but kept his distance from the cub. Could be old. The scratches are not, Grace said. She looked at the little wolf again. His golden eyes were still open, but his body had begun to tremble more noticeably beneath the falling snow. Whatever mystery surrounded the trap could wait. He could not. Help me free him. Daniel nodded. Together they studied the release mechanism while Grace kept one hand gently between the cub's ears. Stay with me, she whispered. Daniel pressed the release lever with his boot, while Caleb carefully pulled the metal open. The moment the pressure was gone, Grace wrapped the cub in her gray cloak and lifted him against her chest. He was lighter than she expected. Too light. We need shelter, she said. Owen pointed toward the ridge. There is an old ranger station about half a mile east. Daniel picked up the trap. Caleb frowned. Why are you bringing that? Because somebody removed a crest from it, Daniel replied. Until we know why, it is evidence. They moved quickly through the trees. Grace carried the cub beneath her cloak, protecting him from the wind while Daniel led them toward the shelter. Every few steps, she looked down to make sure his eyes were still open. By the time they reached the small stone building, snow had begun falling harder. Owen found dry firewood stacked beneath an overhang, and within minutes a small fire warmed the single room. Grace sat near it with the cub resting across her lap. Caleb offered his scarf, and she folded it beneath the cub's injured leg for support. He needs a healer, Daniel said. I will send Owen back to Cedar Ridge. Grace nodded, but the cub suddenly became restless when Owen stepped closer. His breathing quickened. Grace placed her palm against his shoulder. Easy. Nobody is going to make you go anywhere. Almost immediately, he settled. Caleb noticed. He only does that with you. Grace looked down. Maybe he knows I am the least frightening person here. Nobody laughed. The cub's eyes drifted closed. Grace touched his ears. They felt colder than before. Fear tightened her chest. Daniel. He crossed the room. What is wrong? He is getting colder. Daniel looked toward the door. The healer will take time. Grace pulled the cloak more securely around the cub and held him against the warmth of her body. She had no healing gift, no impressive wolf, no special rank. All she could offer was what she had. Listen to me, she whispered. You are not dying alone. The words caught unexpectedly in her throat. Her mother had once said something similar during the worst winter of Grace's childhood, when fever had left her frightened beneath a pile of blankets. Her mother had sat beside her until morning, smoothing her hair and kissing her forehead whenever Grace woke. Remembering that tenderness, Grace bent and pressed a gentle kiss to the cub's forehead. Warmth answered beneath her lips. Grace froze. It moved through her palm, up her arm, and settled somewhere deep behind her ribs. Her breath caught. For years, the wolf inside her had been little more than a distant presence, so quiet that Cedar Ridge had decided it was weakness. Now it lifted its head. Awake. Miles away, on a dark road north of Cedar Ridge, Ethan Blackwood suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. Captain Marcus Reed turned toward him. Your Majesty? Ethan closed his eyes as a familiar pulse moved through the royal blood bond for the first time in hours. His eyes opened. Noah is alive. Then we stop searching everywhere and start following the bond. Ethan Blackwood turned his horse toward the southwest before Captain Marcus Reed could answer. For nearly 2 hours, the royal search party had crossed frozen roads and narrow forest trails looking for any sign of Noah. Now Ethan could feel the cub again, faint but unmistakable, like a warm pulse beneath the winter silence. How far? Marcus asked as the guards changed direction behind them. Ethan focused on the fragile connection. Several miles. Maybe less. Something else moved through the bond, something Ethan had never felt before. Noah was frightened and exhausted, but beneath those emotions was an unexpected calm, as though someone had reached him and convinced him he was safe. Ethan urged his horse forward. Back at the ranger shelter, Grace still held Noah beside the small fire. The strange warmth inside her had faded, but her wolf remained awake, alert in a way Grace had never experienced. Noah opened his golden eyes whenever she spoke, then relaxed again beneath her hand. Daniel stood near the door, while Caleb examined the trap under the lantern. There is definitely a crown beneath those scratches, Caleb said. Someone wanted it hidden. Grace looked at Noah. Then somebody might be looking for him. Daniel glanced through the doorway. I think they already are. Hoofbeats approached through the forest. Not one horse. Many. Owen, who had been preparing to leave for Cedar Ridge, stepped back inside. Riders from the north. Within minutes, dark figures appeared between the pines. Royal guards entered the clearing first, their black winter cloaks carrying the silver crest of Blackwood. Daniel immediately raised both hands to show peaceful intent. Grace remained beside the fire with Noah wrapped against her chest. Then Ethan Blackwood stepped through the shelter doorway. He seemed larger than the portraits Grace had seen in Cedar Ridge Hall, not because of his height, but because everyone around him became silent the moment he arrived. His blue eyes found Noah instantly. Relief flashed across his face. Then he noticed Grace. His gaze moved over her muddy cloak, the cub in her arms, and finally the steel trap beneath Caleb's lantern. The relief vanished behind controlled suspicion. "Give him to me," Ethan said. Grace tightened her hold without meaning to. Noah stirred and pressed closer to her. "He needs to stay warm." Ethan took one step forward. "He needs his family." Grace looked at him sharply. "Family?" Before she could ask what he meant, Noah made a faint distressed sound. Ethan stopped. His eyes narrowed, not at Grace, but at the cub's reaction. "Why is he afraid?" "He has been frightened since I found him," Grace said. "Found him where?" "About half a mile west of here. He was caught in that trap." Ethan looked toward the metal device. "And you expect me to believe you had nothing to do with it?" Daniel stepped forward. "Your Majesty, she was already helping him when we arrived." Ethan did not look away from Grace. "Then she can hand him to my guards." Grace remembered Logan telling her he needed someone strong enough to stand beside him. She remembered Caleb telling her rank existed for a reason. Every voice tonight had expected obedience from her. Noah trembled again. Grace made her choice. "No." The shelter went completely silent. Marcus stared at her. Ethan's expression hardened. "What did you say?" Grace stood slowly, keeping Noah secure against her chest. Her knees felt weak, but her voice remained steady. "Bring your healer here. Let Noah decide when he is ready to leave my arms." Ethan's eyes changed at the sound of the cub's name. "How do you know his name?" Grace froze. She did not. She had heard it only in the strange warmth inside her mind, a whisper she had assumed was imagination. Before she could answer, Noah lifted his head and looked directly at the Alpha King. Noah held the Alpha King's gaze for one long second, then did something nobody in the shelter expected. He turned away from Ethan and tucked his head beneath Grace's arm. Captain Marcus Reed shifted beside the doorway. Daniel and Caleb exchanged uncertain looks. Ethan remained perfectly still. "Noah," he said again, softer this time. The cub's ears moved at the familiar voice, but he stayed against Grace. She felt his heartbeat beneath her palm. "He knows you," she said. "Yes." Ethan's answer carried something deeper than authority now. "Then give him a moment." Marcus looked as though he expected the king to refuse. Instead, Ethan removed one glove and slowly extended an empty hand. Noah watched him, but made no attempt to leave Grace. "He has never been afraid of me," Ethan said. Grace studied his face. For the first time, she saw worry beneath the controlled expression. Not a king demanding possession. A man frightened for someone he loved. "Maybe he is not afraid of you," Grace said. "Maybe he is afraid of being moved again." Ethan's gaze shifted toward the trap. Again, Grace nodded. Someone brought him into this forest. That crest was scratched away deliberately. Caleb lifted the trap beneath the lantern. Ethan stepped closer to inspect it, and Grace saw recognition pass through his eyes. "Royal property," he said quietly. Marcus turned sharply. "Are you certain?" "I ordered this design removed from service 3 years ago." Silence settled over the room. Noah stirred again, trying to stand in Grace's arms. "Easy," she whispered, but the cub pushed gently against her cloak. Grace lowered him carefully onto the floor. His injured leg remained supported by Caleb's scarf, and for a moment he simply stood there, gathering his balance. Ethan crouched several feet away. "Come here, Noah." The cub took one small step, then another. Grace felt relief rise in her chest. But Noah stopped halfway between them. He looked at Ethan, then turned around and returned to Grace. He leaned against her boot and sat down. Marcus exhaled softly. Ethan stared at the little wolf. Grace expected frustration. Instead, something in the king's face softened. His attention moved to the scarf supporting Noah's leg, then to the torn edge of Grace's cloak where she had removed fabric to keep the cub warm. He looked at Daniel. "When you found them, what was she doing?" "Trying to free him," Daniel answered immediately. "She refused to leave him behind." "And the trap?" "Already there." Ethan looked at Grace again. Suspicion did not disappear all at once. It changed into thought, into reconsideration. That mattered more. Outside, royal riders shifted among the snowy trees. Ethan reached for the ceremonial spear he had carried during the search, then deliberately lowered its silver tip until it rested against the floor beside him. "Marcus, Your Majesty, bring Dr. Harper inside." Grace released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Ethan rose but kept his distance from Noah. "Nobody moves the cub until the healer examines him here." Marcus nodded and left immediately. Ethan's eyes settled on Grace. "And nobody separates him from her." Daniel relaxed beside the doorway. Grace did not. Not yet. She had spent too many years watching powerful people change their minds only when it suited them. Ethan seemed to understand her hesitation. "You still do not trust me," he said. Grace met his eyes. "I met you 5 minutes ago." For the first time that night, the corner of Ethan's mouth almost lifted. "Fair." Then his expression became serious again. "But you protected Noah without knowing who he was." Grace looked down at the cub leaning against her boot. "Who is he?" Ethan was silent until footsteps approached outside. Then he answered, "My sister's son." Grace's breath caught. Ethan looked at Noah with unmistakable tenderness. "My nephew. And someone inside my kingdom wanted him to disappear." Dr. Harper entered the shelter carrying a leather medical bag, but Noah immediately pressed closer to Grace's boot. The healer stopped several feet away and lowered herself slowly. "I will not touch him until he is comfortable." Grace appreciated that. Ethan did too. "Examine him here," the Alpha King said. Grace returned to the floor beside Noah and gathered him gently into her cloak. Only then did Dr. Harper approach. She checked his breathing, examined his injured leg, and replaced Caleb's scarf with a clean supportive wrap. Noah remained tense whenever unfamiliar hands came near, but each time Grace touched the fur between his ears, he relaxed. Dr. Harper noticed. Whatever happened before she found him, he associates her with safety. Ethan's eyes stayed on Grace. Will he recover? He is cold and exhausted, but he is stronger than he looks. She kept him warm and prevented him from struggling unnecessarily. That helped more than she probably realizes. Grace looked down at Noah. "I did not do anything special." "You stayed," Dr. Harper replied. The word struck somewhere tender. Grace had spent the evening being told she lacked the strength to stand beside someone. Now a royal healer was telling her that simply refusing to leave had mattered. Ethan crouched across from her. "Why?" Grace looked up. "Why what? Why did you save him?" His voice held no suspicion now, only curiosity. "You did not know his name. You did not know he was connected to me. You could have walked away." Grace thought of the clearing, the cold metal, and Noah staring at her as if one stranger's decision had become his entire world. Because he needed someone. Ethan became very still. Grace almost looked away, uncomfortable beneath the weight of his attention, but Noah placed one small paw across her wrist. Ethan noticed and lowered his gaze. "My sister died when Noah was very young," he said quietly. "I promised her he would always be protected." The title of Alpha King seemed to disappear from his voice. For a moment, Grace heard only an uncle carrying an old promise. "How did he get here?" she asked. Ethan's expression hardened with thought. He disappeared from a guarded royal estate shortly before sunset. We believed he had wandered beyond the grounds. Daniel set the recovered trap beneath the lantern. Then this changes that. Ethan turned it carefully without touching the damaged edges. This design came from a royal reserve. It should have been destroyed years ago. Captain Marcus Reed stepped closer. Only palace staff and reserve officers would have known where the old equipment was stored. Grace felt the room grow colder despite the fire. So Noah did not simply wander into Cedar Ridge. Ethan looked at her. "No." Dr. Harper finished securing the wrap and gave Noah a final reassuring glance. "He can travel once he has warmed a little longer." Noah immediately settled against Grace again. Marcus almost smiled. Travel might be difficult if he refuses to leave her. Ethan did not smile. He studied the cub, then Grace, as though another question had begun forming. "There is something else," Grace said. Everyone turned toward her. She hesitated. "When I held him earlier, I knew his name." Marcus frowned. "Someone told you?" "No." Grace looked at Ethan. "I heard it inside my mind." The fire cracked softly. Ethan's expression changed. "That is not possible." Grace swallowed. "I know." Noah lifted his golden eyes toward her. At the same moment, The quiet wolf inside Grace stirred again. This time Ethan felt something too. His gaze sharpened, not with suspicion, but recognition. And neither of them noticed the second symbol beginning to appear beneath the frost on the recovered trap. Grace stared at Ethan, unsettled by the recognition in his eyes. You felt something. It was not a question. Ethan glanced toward Noah before answering. When you spoke his name, the royal bond shifted. Captain Marcus Reed frowned. That should only happen between members of the Blackwood bloodline. She is not Blackwood, Ethan said. Grace almost laughed from nerves. I can confirm that. Dr. Harper reached for Grace's hand. You have a small scrape across your palm. Let me clean it before we leave. Grace extended her hand, but Noah shifted beneath her cloak, forcing her to adjust her position. Ethan instinctively reached forward to steady her wrist. The moment his fingers touched her skin, warmth rushed through Grace so suddenly that her breath caught. The fire, the voices, the winter wind beyond the shelter all seemed to fade. Deep inside her, the wolf that had remained quiet for years rose with startling certainty. Not fear. Recognition. Ethan released Grace immediately. His blue eyes widened. He had felt it too. What was that? Grace whispered. Nobody answered at first. Dr. Harper looked between them with unmistakable understanding. Marcus became very still. Noah, however, seemed completely unsurprised. The cub lifted his head and gave one soft, contented sound before settling against Grace again. Ethan's voice lowered. Grace. Hearing her name from him made the warmth return. She stood quickly and stepped back. No, Ethan did not follow. I have not said anything. You do not have to. Grace's heartbeat refused to slow. I know the stories. Everyone does. She thought of Logan beneath the lanterns at Cedar Ridge Hall. Only hours earlier, she had stood before an entire pack, while someone decided she was not worthy of standing beside him. Now fate itself seemed ready to make another decision about her before the night was even over. I was rejected tonight, she said. Ethan's expression changed. By whom? That does not matter. It matters if he hurt you. He embarrassed me. That is different. Grace drew a careful breath. But I will not leave one bond and immediately be placed inside another because tradition says I should. Marcus looked toward Ethan, perhaps expecting royal authority to answer. Ethan only removed his hand from between them and stepped backward. Then you will not. Grace blinked. What? If this is what we think it is, it changes nothing about your right to choose. His voice was calm. A bond is not ownership. Grace searched his face for pride, irritation, anything that suggested he was merely waiting for her to become reasonable. She found none. Ancient law gives an alpha king certain rights, Marcus said carefully. Ethan looked at him. Then ancient law can wait outside. Grace almost smiled despite herself. Ethan turned back to her. You do not belong to me, Grace Miller. Not because of rank. Not because of fate. Not because someone else failed to value you. The words reached a place she had spent years protecting. Before Grace could answer, Daniel called from beside the lantern. Your Majesty, you need to see this. Frost had melted from the recovered trap. Beneath the damaged royal crown, a second insignia had become visible, small but unmistakable. Ethan crossed the room and stared at it. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his expression. Marcus stepped beside him. You recognize it? Ethan nodded once. Grace moved closer. Whose mark is it? Ethan looked toward the dark forest beyond the doorway. Someone who was supposed to be inside Blackwood Palace all night. Someone who was supposed to be inside Blackwood Palace all night. Ethan's words left the shelter silent. Captain Marcus Reed leaned closer to the insignia, his expression tightening with recognition. Then whoever arranged this expected Noah to be found far from the palace. Or never connected to the palace at all, Grace said. Ethan looked at her. The faint royal crown had been deliberately erased, leaving Cedar Ridge to carry whatever suspicion followed. Daniel folded his arms. Someone wanted this to look like our territory was responsible. Ethan nodded. And until we know who, nobody sends word ahead that Noah has been found. Marcus immediately understood. We return without announcement. Dr. Harper finished packing her medical bag. Noah can travel, but he should remain warm and avoid unnecessary movement. As if understanding her, Noah pressed closer to Grace. Ethan watched him, then turned to her. Come with us. Grace's shoulders stiffened. Ethan noticed. That was an invitation, not an order. Why me? You found Noah. You saw the trap before anyone knew what it meant. You may have heard his name through a connection none of us understand. His gaze softened. And he trusts you. Grace looked down at the cub. What happens when we reach the palace? Noah goes somewhere secure. Marcus and I determine who had access to the old royal equipment. You decide what happens next for you. Even with the bond. Especially with the bond. Grace studied him carefully. She had known Logan for years and still discovered how quickly affection could disappear when status became inconvenient. She had known Ethan for less than an hour, yet the Alpha King had already done something Logan never had. He had been given power over a moment and chosen restraint. Outside, royal guards prepared the horses. Ethan reached for the ceremonial spear resting near the doorway. Grace's attention followed the movement. He noticed and paused. Then, rather than carrying it toward her, he stepped outside and placed it horizontally across the snow. Marcus stared at him. Your Majesty? Ethan kept his eyes on Grace. Among the Blackwood family, a weapon laid down means the conversation continues without authority or threat. He returned with empty hands and stopped several feet from her. I am asking, Grace Miller. Not commanding. He extended one hand. Will you come with us until Noah is safe? Grace looked at his hand. Hours earlier, she had stood beneath Cedar Ridge's lanterns while someone else decided what she was worth. Since then, she had stopped waiting for permission. She had left the trail for a frightened sound. She had challenged wolves above her rank. She had protected a cub whose name she somehow knew before anyone spoke it. Now destiny itself seemed to be offering another path. But this time, the choice belonged to her. Grace placed her hand in Ethan's. Warmth moved between them again, gentler than before. Ethan did not tighten his grip. He simply helped her stand and released her. Until Noah is safe, Grace said. Until Noah is safe, Ethan promised. Before dawn, the royal party left Cedar Ridge beneath a sky beginning to turn pale blue. Grace rode inside a warm carriage with Noah sleeping beside her while Ethan traveled nearby on horseback. Behind them, Cedar Ridge disappeared between snow-covered pines. Ahead, beyond miles of winter forest, Blackwood Palace waited among the mountains. Grace rested her hand beside Noah's small paw and watched the first light touch the horizon. She had entered the forest believing rejection had made her smaller. She was leaving it knowing something different. Kindness had required more courage from her than obedience ever had. Outside the carriage, Ethan glanced toward her, then toward the distant palace where someone was waiting for news that would never arrive. Noah was alive. Grace was coming with him. And the secret hidden behind the royal walls had just become far more dangerous to keep. If this story reminded you that true strength can be gentle and every heart deserves the freedom to choose, please like the video, share it with someone who loves stories of courage and destiny, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable journeys where kindness changes everything.